Super Mario World, a necessity for gracious living. When it comes to the history of video games, few titles are quite as memorable and refined as the Mario Brothers jump into the realm of 16-bit gaming. Despite being released over 30 years ago, many still view this one as the apex of 2D platforming. The better sound and graphics compared to previous Mario games, combined with the ridiculous amount of non-linearity and secrets within this adventure's stages, resulted in a quite frankly unforgettable journey. Oh yeah, and the game introduced Yoshi. So what was not to love about Super Mario World? Well, this is one of those video games that many players have indulged in so much that they feel they know it inside out. Believe it or not, hidden in the murky depths of gaming history are forgotten secrets about the title that in many instances not even the most hardcore fans are aware of. So without further ado, I am Lady Decade and this is the lost pre-release version of Super Mario World. On the 9th of September 1987, the then Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi revealed the development of the Super Famicom in the newspaper Kyoto Shimbun. Bizarrely, for a good while, little was heard about Nintendo's next generation system for a while, with some journalists speculating that the Nintendo president was doing the console war equivalent of mere saber rattling to hurt PC Engine sales that Christmas. To be fair, this does sound like a pretty good theory, especially when we consider that the 16-bit Nintendo console would not hit store shelves in the region until 3 years later. Released on the 21st of November 1990, the Super Famicom would launch alongside the now equally legendary Super Mario World, but for those who had been following the gaming media at the time, Nintendo had been hyping up the game and showing it off for the previous 2 years before this. A 16-bit Mario title known at the time as Super Mario Bros. 4 was first spoken about on the 30th of August 1988. This would be in a Nintendo interview with Touch magazine, whereby the development of such a title would be announced. Which is pretty crazy really, considering that it was 2 months before Super Mario Bros. 3 had hit store shelves. Unlike previous Super Mario games that had been directed by Shigeru Miyamoto, in this case, Takashi Tezuka would take the helm, with Miyamoto sliding into the producer role this time around. A core team of around 10 people would work on the game, with one former team member stating that Miyamoto wielded the most authority anyway. The game seemed like a huge challenge for all involved, as this was the first Mario game on a new platform. Tezuka, for example, brought it up in the past that when making the game, the software tools for the Super Famicom were not even fully developed yet, and the team had to go along with starting something new. It's no wonder that over its 2-year development cycle, Super Mario World would end up going through many drastic changes, resulting in a very different game from what first had been envisioned. In the earliest phases of the project, for example, Miyamoto mentions that as an experiment, the team would port Super Mario Bros. 3 over to the Super Famicom, but despite this new version's improved colours and sprites, it was still the same game, and instead Miyamoto wanted to create something new. The legend behind the Super Mario Bros. Series acknowledges that he and his team no longer had the same restrictions that they were faced with when developing games on 8-bit hardware, and certain mechanics such as scrolling and the number of colours that could be displayed on the screen at once were vastly improved with the new hardware. So, with ideas in place with regards to the game that they were building, it was time to show off some of the fruits of their labour. Early builds of Super Mario World would finally surface on the 28th of July 1989. This was during the 1989 Shoshinkai event, Nintendo's annual trade show that would later be rebranded as Space World. Shoshinkai 1989 was the first of these trade shows that Nintendo ever hosted, so the level of pomp and pageantry around such an event had not reached the heights that Space World would receive in later years. Back then, Shoshinkai events were private and were only open to the press rather than the gaming public, so it is no wonder that so much mystery and intrigue surrounds this era of gaming's past. At this event, at least 2 early builds of the game were shown off, with photos of the game being taken of it while it was being played on a big projector screen. This first photographic evidence of the game was published and shown in issues of both Famitsu and Famimaga, released in 1989. How exciting! As you can see from these screenshots, some elements were pretty much done, whereas others would be changed drastically. Back then, the development link between Mario World and Super Mario Bros. 3 was a lot clearer than what we would get with the final product. So let's discuss some of these awesome early screenshots. This shot of the title screen from 1989 shows that rather than being multicoloured, the early text logo for the game was blue, and rather than displaying gameplay like with the final version, we can merely see a sepia map of an island in the background, which looks different from any locations presented in the final cut. Speaking of maps, a shot of the overworld exists, displaying an area labelled as World 2. Once again, the map looks nothing like what can be found in the release version, which shows how much change the game must have gone through between the Shoshinkai event and its commercial release 1 year later. There's a lot to take in from just this one image, from the fact that the small Mario in the corner has a different sprite to the domed mushroom-like house that looks very Super Mario Bros. 3. It is certainly interesting to simply stare at. This further shot of one of the stages reveals to us that dragon coins looked very different too. There was no Yoshi emblem being present on them, and that is, of course, if these things even were dragon coins to begin with, considering it would make little sense to have 4 of them directly next to each other anyway. So who knows what is going on here. This screenshot, like many, shows off donut-shaped clouds floating in the sky, and that fire flowers looked practically the same as the ones that were present in Super Mario Bros. 3, which further emphasises the transition between the 2 games was not quite complete yet. But this is only the start of how Mario 3-like the game was back then. Back then, the feather that allows Super Mario to gain a cape and fly in the game had not been created as of yet, so instead Mario could grab the classic leaf and become Super Mario Bros. 3's Raccoon Mario. How retro. This early beta stage shown here displays to us that Koopa Troopers appeared closer to their design in Mario Bros. 3, and the second larger floating platform present in the image would not be used within the final game at all. Looking very carefully at this screenshot displays to us yet another Super Mario Bros. 3 asset, a breakable block creeping into our line of sight on the far left of the screen. This out of place looking wooden block present in this castle stage screenshot also appears to be a further element that was pinched for this early build from Mario Bros. 3. As we moved closer to the release of the game, magazine screenshots would slowly begin to look more like the final product, but there were still many huge differences that would separate many of these from what we would finally get. This shot of an overworld, for example, shows some progress, but the area looks like nowhere from the final version of the game. There's a lot of curiosities floating about, such as this image that shows the fire flower's colour has been changed, or this image of the first castle stage that shows no lava present at the bottom of the screen. We also have another image showing the blocks from Super Mario Bros. 3, but this time with much more clarity. This image of Larry Cooper facing off against Mario in many cases resembles a Super Mario Bros. 3 character sprite rather than the one that showed up in the final version. Speaking of Mario 3 goodness, the game seems like it used to have Super Mario 3 Paragoombas as opposed to the winged Galoombas that the game would ultimately receive, and question mark blocks were more Mario 3-esque too. Other quirky imagery displays the Big Boo and Note blocks on what appears to be a test stage, and other screenshots show off this early yet more menacing design for Bonsai Bill. What's sad is, despite all of these old images existing, including one whereby the title is displayed as Super Mario Bros. 4 Super Mario World, no actual gameplay footage exists of these early games. But this doesn't mean that years later this would be the only beta goodness we'd be getting. To commemorate the release of the Super Famicom Mini, there would be an interview published on the Nintendo website spotlighting the development process of Super Mario World. The interview would include Takushi Tezuki along with graphic designer Shigefumi Hino. The 2017 piece would show off some early title sets displaying what appears to be many enemies that did not appear in the game. Most interestingly of all, the early sprite work for the dinosaur companion looks drastically different from the final design. Hino states, "There was a rough sketch that Tezuka drew and it was cute and nice, so I finished it based on that and it became Yoshi's current appearance." Fortunately, this would not be the only time that we would get to learn more about Super Mario World's mysterious early beginnings, and although the 1989 build of the game doesn't seem to have been made available to anyone to play since the first ever Shoshinkai event, some unused assets for the game were rediscovered in the ROM for the SNES Burn test cart, a cartridge that was used to test various hardware components in the SNES. The next big chapter in this story of rediscovery, though, would unfold in July of 2020 when the infamous Nintendo GigaLeak would reveal the Super Mario World source code. All sorts of old assets would be revealed as part of this leak, including what appeared to be a beta sprite of Cape Mario wearing a crash helmet. There were also sprites for unused enemies such as this Loch Ness monster-like beast and animations for that bizarre early version of Yoshi which we mentioned earlier. What a crazy turn of events! To top this whole story off, perhaps most intriguingly of all, many passionate gamers online have been fascinated with the lost Super Mario World beta for years. So rather than simply hope and pray for the day that the 1989 build turns up, instead they have turned to modding and hacking to recreate a playable form of what could be found in magazines back in the day. The most up-to-date and refined effort relating to such an endeavour is known as Project Kinoko Island, which aims to be the most impressive series of Super Mario World beta mods that are available to play on the Information Superhighway. Those involved aim to recreate the 1989 and 1990 Super Mario World prototypes, with 4 builds in total being planned. I am very excited to see what they come up with in the future and visit this store again down the line. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe and check out my recent upload on Mario 64's Lost Beta from 1995. See you soon. Thank you.